Hey, howdy. It's time for another hour of blabbing and playing Zuma's Revenge, I guess. Last time we were on End of Rooster Rumble, I believe. So move on to these. Eventually we'll get to the levels at Avon East. But before I do anything, I want to try something. Moo moo. There we go. So, this would normally activate what's called moo moo mode, which screws around with the visual effects, but the game is convinced that I have a low-end graphics card. Zakamu suggests a video card upgrade. Thanks, Zakamu. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I think today's just gonna be another day to chill and talk about whatever. And whatever is basically what I have planned. So the main item of the day that is something that piqued my interest and has continued piquing my interest is the release of Heaven Studio. So to those of you that don't know what Heaven Studio is, I publish a few videos of me getting no misses on the new games that they made for that editor. But for those of you that have never heard of it in their lives, Heaven Studio is a sort of like an upgraded version of a lot of the Rhythm Heaven custom remix makers that have been around for ages. Main difference being is that it is way more comprehensive, is fully made in Unity, and most importantly, allows you to actually play the games in engine. Now this is huge. Like, this is such a big leap forward. And of course, because they're now playable, it has to come with an extra big legal disclaimer of, no, we are not the Rhythm Heaven team, we are not claiming to be the Rhythm Heaven team, Nintendo, please don't nuke us from orbit. There's a big old thing on the Discord server. It's like, please, like, don't replicate the levels of the original Rhythm Heaven and post them here. Don't, like, just like, don't do it, please. We're trying not to get sued here. The stuff that's there is awesome. There's even a few new mini-games. I think out of the three, my personal favorite is Trick of the Class, as janky as it is. I love Trick of the Class just for the story behind it, because both of the other new games were Rhythm Heaven mods, or otherwise. Because the other two games that were included were Rhythm Somen, which is a super famous old Flash game. That's just like a recreation of a Rhythm Heaven-esque game. And the other one is a recreation of a Megamix mod called Meat Grinder. Trick of the Class is a beast of a different color, because Trick of the Class is based on one of the games from the notorious Rhythm Heaven bootleg, Rhythm Heaven-Fever, also often just called Rhythm Hyphen by the community. I didn't know it existed until now, but that is kind of hilarious. But it's super fun to mess around in. I am horrible at the editor right now, but I'm slowly getting my bearings. Who knows? Eventually I might actually make a custom remix or two. We'll see. I feel like that could be a lot of fun. I've always been a fan of like edits synced up to music. Like again, I think of Grapefruit. Because that is kind of his specialty. The edits synced up to music in a very cool and satisfying way. That are also in a way that's actually like a little restrained. Because there are some content creators, like I haven't watched too much of his stuff, but I think Maxor does this. It's like a lot more like super high energy gameplay paired with music. But I do also, I kind of prefer it when it's a little bit more laid back. It's less about being impressed by the music and more just like vibing with it. And cool transitions between different frames. That is always like, that is an easy way to impress me. Because I've got a musical mind, so anytime things are synced up to music and they're actually synced up to music and not just someone in Adobe Premiere who thinks they're being slick, almost syncing something up with music, I am very happy. But Trick of the Class is fun. It is weirdly adorable despite being like notably, I don't want to say lower effort because they clearly spent a lot of, there was a lot of thought put into how to adapt it in a way that doesn't look like ass, and I think they did a pretty good job, but it's still, the art style is a little lacking because it is, well, from a bootleg. So it only makes sense that the art style is a little bit flaky. Because the game it's from is also a little bit of a lot flaky. I'm still dealing with the scorching heat of, well, the inside of my freaking dorm room, and I've come to peace with it at this point. But life is generally good. I got my first acceptance letter for grad school, so now it was a boilerplate school. But I mean, if all else fails, I now have a place that I go to grad school. If all else fails, which makes me very happy. Grad school is probably going to be a lot of fun. I expect it to be ridiculous, very hard, a lot of writing, I predict. Whether there's actually a lot of writing is, I mean, left to be seen, of course, but knowing what I know about higher level computer science, there's going to be a lot of writing about the ethics and the theory and the morals. I haven't talked about ethics in a while. That is a sentence that I was not expecting to say today. It's been a while since I've talked about ethical dilemmas. And there's a lot of weird things. Weird, like, little ethical quandaries. And I was sort of talking about that last time I played this. When I went on the whole spiel about like prejudice and all that. But part of the reason why it comes to mind is that my professor for symbolic logic is I don't know what classes he teaches specifically, but two that I know offhand are obviously he teaches symbolic logic. He also teaches metaphysics. And when I mean metaphysics, I don't mean like Yick trying to like metaphysics in the sense of like, oh, isn't it so weird that if you go inside your mind, you may never come back out, and sometimes it'll give you superpowers? No. It's more just like, hey, isn't it fucking wild that we can think? It's the epitome of a shower thoughts class, and I mean that in the best possible way. I've always wanted to take it, but I've never had the time. But I feel like I would have loved it if I had the ability to take it. If I ever become a college professor, I'll have to become friends with a metaphysics professor, if there is one at the college that I end up working at, because I feel like they'd be a fun friend to have, because they're the not the type of friend to think overly highly of themselves. Because if there's anyone that you can rely on to be introspective, it's someone who is learning metaphysics. Because as it turns out, thinking about thought makes you think about yourself a lot too, and not in a self-centered way. But he's already brought up a few fun little like paradoxes and schools of thought in class. And I dig it. I love it. Like one thing that he brought up is I always forget the name of it. It is there's this running thing in Greek philosophy that it's basically the Greek philosopher equivalent of throwing shit at each other when the other person is in the middle of a philosophy lecture. It's like, hey, you said you had a good point? Fuck you. Here's a counterexample. I always think of the Diogenes and the chicken. Because to those of you who haven't heard about that, that is a really funny example. Just the epitome of Greek philosophers being the most insufferable members of Greek education. So, the Diogenes example is, I believe he was presenting a counter-argument to Aristotle. I always mix up who's who when it comes to these examples, because a lot of them do talk about the same stuff. They have different means, and they have different like methods of explaining, but a lot of them say a lot of the same stuff. One of them was giving a lecture about how, fairly certain it was Socrates, that man is a biped. It's like a mammal and a biped or something like that. Not a mammal and a biped. It's something along the lines of a creature walks on two legs and has no fur, therefore it is a man. So Diogenes walks into the guy's lecture hall one day, waving a chicken around and is yelling, "Behold a man!" Because by his definition, that is also a man, because it's also... It was featherless. That was the other thing. It was a featherless biped. So he brought in a plucked chicken and started waving it around because it was featherless and walked on 2 legs, so by that definition, it was a human. Diogenes... Like, a lot of the philosophers come across as kind of insufferable. Diogenes seems, like, particularly egregious. In a very fun way. Socrates, too. Socrates has this style of thought and argument that is not unlike the way I talk about things when I'm in these long conversations. The trouble is that when I'm doing it, I'm kind of just shooting the shit and talking about whatever comes to mind. For Socrates, he does it because that is literally his train of thought and his school of thought. Like Socratic, and using examples and using other things that you know about life and about living and about experiences to act on future experiences. So he will go on a 45-minute long tirade tying together 8 different counter examples that all happened to him while he was on the way to the forum. That was satisfying, oh my god. This game is kind of a dopamine factory, I gotta say. Speaking of dopamine factory, I gotta get around to finishing Hammerheads at some point. I think what I'm gonna do is I won't do it this week because I mean I kinda wanna dedicate the rest of this week to, you know, doing my homework and then making sure that I have ample time set aside. Publishing the balance patch for Ennui so I can forget about it for a while until I have the motivation to make the tainted version. Excuse me. But starting next week, I was pondering whether or not I wanted to try and commit to a steady stream schedule, which is like Thursdays and Saturdays, because those seem to be the days in my schedule that I have basically nothing. Because I got class on Monday, Wednesday, that take up most of the day, and during the time before the gauntlet of classes, I'm not really in any mood to do videos, frankly. There will be moments like this after, because, you know, this is being recorded on a Wednesday. But like I said, I want to try and garner an audience that I can shoot the shit with. And what better way to do that than to establish a consistent schedule? That way people don't have to make random guesses for when I'm live. I'm live on Thursdays and Saturdays, but I'm not going to enact it yet. Expect a community post to go up like Saturday or Sunday where I announce it. And if this is the second or third time you've heard the spiel, my apologies. I'm probably going to reiterate this during the 2P stream tomorrow. That's better. But thought experiments. A thought experiment that immediately springs to mind is there's this thought experiment called the Chinese room, and it's often used as a counterexample against artificial intelligence, which already puts it on my radar because I am both a proponent and a cynic when it comes to AI, because I know how it works under the hood. So naturally, I know when people are talking out their ass. Or at least I think I do. Another common metaphysics W question mark is the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. It's a common philosophy moment. Of if you want to be in a field where you're confident in your studies, never go into philosophy, because that's the entire point, is that you're not. But anyway, the Chinese room. This is often used as a counterexample against artificial intelligence working on a high level. That suppose that you have a black box. It just performs operations and you can't see what's inside. All it gives you is the output. Or you feed it an input, it will give you the output, but you can't see anything that's going on inside. And you want it to learn a foreign language. The reason why it's called the Chinese room is that the example that's given is Chinese, but this could work for any language. You just feed it a extremely long list of random phrases. And it runs through one by one and analyzes each phrase. Maybe it constructs some series of use cases for specific types of phrases. Based on some internal axioms. And then eventually, when you feel like it's sufficiently learned the language, you walk in and start having a conversation with it. The question is, has the AI agent, learned how to speak that language? The question is, what does it really mean to learn a language? Does it just mean statistically you have learned the majority of responses for specific sentences? Or is there a higher level understanding to it that can't be matched by an AI agent? And it's a genuinely tricky question that doesn't really, with all these thought experiments, it's always rhetorical. There's no finite answer, otherwise I probably wouldn't be talking about it. If there was a finite answer, some geek from MIT would have solved it by now. Aw. So the crux of the argument is that there is a hidden complexity to artificial intelligence, or to language, that can't be matched by artificial intelligence. And no matter how many sentences are fed into the machine will never truly learn to speak Chinese. It's a really interesting prospect. Because if it were true, it would throw a lot of things into question when it comes to AI, air quotes, learning things. Because think about all the ways that can be applied to the real world, specifically with stuff like search engines, for example, and tracking user preferences and cookies. Is there ever a point at which what it comes down to, is there ever a point at which the agent can predict with 100% certainty, or even near 100% certainty, what a search request is looking for? See through all the layers of nuance and like rhetorical devices. Is there ever a way that it can, even through all of that, glean exactly what the search request is looking for without just grabbing an infinite amount of bulk data and using that? Because you have this massive heap of information that can be used to make guesses. However, the argument is that that's not good enough. And it brings up a good question. Is it good enough? And this is a question that, I mean, I was having a conversation with the rest of the class in AI at one point, and I brought this up when talking about things like ChatGPT and generative AI. That part of the danger with it is that it can be wrong. And the question that came up is, well, does that matter? And my answer was yes, because thinking back to this thought experiment. If you want something with 100%, if you want something that is 100% right all the time, well, you're just asking for something completely unrealistic. And now we get to the problem that you kind of need something to be 100% accurate to prevent things like, you know, someone asking ChatGPT for an answer and it inadvertently giving a wrong or racist or potentially harmful answer because literally it doesn't know any better. It's just reading off of bulk data. So that's always an interesting thought, And it is a very good rebuttal against AI that's often seen as infallible. Though, to be fair at this point, like, even normal society is well aware of how fallible generative AI can be. And that's not even considering that I don't even think the suit against the New York Times has gone to court yet. Like, it's been filed and everything, but I don't think anything has actually come of it yet, which, I mean, that has me very interested to see what the legal system thinks of artificial intelligence. Because there's a lot of very weird questions that normally get brushed off that have to be addressed because there's a very common thread between a lot of stuff in the legal world that revolves around intent. Things like the difference between murder and manslaughter. Murder is murder because of intent to cause harm. If you don't intend to cause harm and you kill someone, that constitutes manslaughter. So there's a reason why it's called vehicular manslaughter and not vehicular murder. Because if you kill someone, if you intentionally run someone over with a car, that's just called murder. If I were to throw you into a meat grinder, if I were to hit you with my car intentionally, that's just murder. That's just the end of the discussion. But when there's a lack of intent, things get a little bit more fuzzy. And it all comes down to things like negligence, and negligence, or perhaps things like bias and maybe some sort of prejudice. And this is going to be a very important point of discussion for the AI trial. Or for future AI trials, I should say. I'm not really sure if it's relevant to the New York Times case. The New York Times case, I believe, is just a matter of, well, plagiarism. It's like, congratulations, you're using bulk data You didn't ask us to use our bulk data, so now we're suing you because you used our bulk data. You used our information without our permission, and we don't want to give you permission. Is the thing. The only reason the New York Times is still above water, frankly, is that they are very protective of their articles, and rightfully so, because how else are you going to make money as a journalist institution that doesn't involve, well, horribly immoral things like what ended up happening with Rupert Murdoch and Fox News, where you create an endless cycle of anger to keep your fans constantly coming back. And the fact that I'm calling them fans, in light of the fact that it's a news agency, should tell you everything you need to know. Hell, I could go so far as to call them cultists, but I'm not going to, since even I feel like that's a bit much. But there are a whole lot of people on Reddit that would call them cultists. So I'll leave it at that. But the trouble that's pretty common is that there are some problems that are simply impossible to always do the air quotes right thing in every situation. It's just infeasible, also literally impossible, because in a lot of situations, there are uncomfortable moral dilemmas that have no clear-cut answer. No matter what, someone's gonna get burned, or someone's going to get killed, like the trolley problem. Now, the trolley problem is probably the most famous sort of thought experiment of this type of all time. Like, people bring up the trolley problem outside of these special cases because it's such a common dilemma. And the vernacular is a little dated because, I mean, it's called the freaking trolley problem, first off. If it was called, like, I imagine a more apt descriptor for it, for more modern questions, would be something like the highway problem. But giving the classical version of the thought experiment for a second, suppose that you have a trolley, and this trolley is going down the tracks at high speed and cannot be easily stopped. You come to a fork in the road, or a fork in the track, I should say. And as you're approaching the fork, you notice that on the path that you're currently traveling, there is a man tied down to the tracks. You have the option of rerouting the train. But in doing so, it could lead to the death of multiple people on your train because it could derail the train entirely. However, no matter what you do, if you pull that lever, it will save the man's life. And there are 1,000,001 different ways that you can tweak this problem to be more difficult, perhaps to be even simpler. But the reason why this is relevant, and especially relevant to autonomous agents and AI, is that, again, there's a lot of really muddy moral dilemmas like this that you have to try your damnedest to put numbers behind them. Because you have to make a decision. Now, as much as I hate to say it, the correct answer, in my eyes, for a lot of them, is to really just flip a coin. Because a random variable has no bias, just inherently. Now, the problem is that that's not really a good answer, because you think about all the many, many different factors. Suppose that there are, well, first let's apply it to a more modern lens. Suppose that instead of trains on a track, there is a car moving down the highway at high speeds. And a man jaywalks onto the road when he's not supposed to, and the car is in danger of hitting the man. You have the option, the car has the option of swerving out of the way into the median of the highway. However, this has a very high chance of putting the driver in danger and potentially killing him. From there is so many different factors to consider. So many different situations to consider. Like, perhaps the most common one is one that might not spring to mind immediately, is should the vehicle have some amount of loyalty to the driver? Because we get into a very difficult situation here, because logically the answer should be no, in my opinion. Because again, if we're speaking purely logically, supposing for a moment that that person that you're about to crash into is the President of the United States, or something ridiculous like that. Someone of very high class, very high importance. When you weigh it like that, no matter, like, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters what your opinion of that president is. It comes down to, if you have to choose between yourself dying or literally the president of your country dying, I feel like you should choose yourself, just on a basis of authority alone. And importance. If you were to die in the scale of an entire country, I don't think you would even get a news article. You'd get an obituary, but that's about it. If the president were to die, that would be nationwide. That would have nationwide ramifications. So, simply on a matter of importance, your life is worth less in a sense. However, like I said, loyalty has a weird sort of effect here. Because remember, we're not operating in some fantasy world where everything can be perfectly simulated, everything is in theory and not in practice. Now think about this. Suppose that you were trying to buy a car. And you've heard stories of this car and its autonomous agency, but you've heard a news article about the car swerving off the road when someone jumps in front of it and getting the passenger killed. In my opinion, that will make the driver much less likely to purchase that model of car. So when you're thinking in a purely sales sense, which people often do, you'd be less motivated to protect that random person. Because if it values the driver more, then it lets the person driving the car put more trust in the car. It's not a neutral agent that could sacrifice the driver for the sake of someone else. It sounds very self-serving, but that's game theory. People are always, when put in emotional and dangerous situations, people are always going to think of themselves first. Because it's natural. Even though it's the morally right thing, potentially, to put your own life on the line, almost no one is going to do it. Because the consequence of that is losing your own life, of course. It's the prisoner's dilemma. That there are two isolated people. In 90% of situations, if someone is about to get hit by a car, you don't know that person. So you know nothing about the person that's about to get hit by the car, and that person knows nothing about you. And when it comes down to it, it's much less likely that you'll sacrifice your life to save a stranger than someone that you actually know and have an emotional attachment to. Again, it's game theory. Why would you sacrifice yourself? Why would you sacrifice your life for a person you don't even know? It's illogical, as awful as that is to say. And now we get back to the trolley problem, or the highway problem. I mentioned that the person was jaywalking before. There are a myriad of factors that impact your own perception of the person who is in harm's way that might influence whether or not you decide to save them. Now, the important thing to note is that you are not the one saving them in the AI case. But it's a very similar premise, because the AI also has similar biases. And I'm not talking Skynet. I never talk Skynet because it's a dumbass plot device that has no bearing on the real world. When I mean Skynet, when I mean biases, I mean things like what I was talking about before with keeping the drivers safe. And the question becomes, should there be more biases? And how fickle should those biases be? Should there be a bias when it comes to things like social status? Should it just do like a Google search for that person and weigh their life? Should it be able to decide between you and the other person whose life is worth more? And now then the question becomes, what factors? Things like net income, personal accomplishments, potential future accomplishments. And with that in mind, it gets muddier and muddier and muddier. Because when you think about future accomplishments, other things come up that are much more fickle. Nationality, race, ethnicity. Religion, social standing. It gets deeper and deeper and more fickle, drawing more and more on mere stereotypes as opposed to actual logical reasoning. Because again, there's that issue of internal bias, institutionalized bias, and perhaps even bias with a purpose. Maybe the person that programmed the AI is just super racist against one nationality, or super in favor of some other nationality, and intentionally change the biases to value the lives of an entire nation as being or an entire race of people as being worth less, out of malice or out of, this is gonna sound awful, out of a desire to sell more cars. Because again, think about the news article. Think about this from a very cold business sense. Suppose that your car makes national news because of a story like this. And using an American example here. A car is in this situation. There is a white man behind the wheel and the jaywalking man is black. And suppose that that the car lets the jaywalker die. Again, it's a moral dilemma. It's a moral dilemma and there's no real right answer. But at that point, it becomes what side of the fence does the car company want to be on? Because no matter who dies, if whatever media outlet that reports on that issue, if they fixate on the racial aspect, no matter what happens, people are going to be upset. No matter what happens, people are going to assume that the decision was intentional, even if it was completely unbiased. Because again, there's that black box problem. Or I suppose I didn't explicitly talk about the black box issue. I said that the Chinese room experiment was itself a black box, but that is another issue that needs to be addressed when it comes to autonomous agents in general, is that you can't just look under the hood, especially if you're a normal-ass person. And hell, even if you work at Tesla, or you work at Honda, or whatever other company that is making these autonomous vehicles, you can't, it's not as simple as just looking under the hood and seeing a list of biases. Especially if it's based on complex analysis, you can't just find a list of situations and the weights of people's lives in these situations. If it's based on the type of learning algorithms that I'm thinking of, which again is subjective, but in my eyes, all of that information is going to be stored as essentially machine language. It's just going to be stored as a web of connections that can't be easily accessed or easily modified or easily understood, frankly. And I mentioned the explicit intent of adding bias, but there's also the chance that you just can't, that it just runs through all these situations and provides what it believes to be completely unbiased weights of life. Now, whether they're inherently biased is a completely different issue altogether, but it brings up very similar questions. Like the case of, what was the model shit? I think it was either a ChatGPT model or it was some other, like, deep learning AI model, was brigaded by 4chan. A1337. And because they're 4chan, they made it racist. Which is just the kind of sentence you can only really say when you're on the internet. They made the robot racist. Because they just kept pumping in racist diatribes over and over and over again, and essentially corrupted the data set. Because if you have hundreds of thousands of inputs to your database that say one specific thing or one specific set of things, your AI is going to fixate on those specific aspects. Even if it's something as deplorable as, 4chan level racist diatribes. Sorry. My train of thought has reached its destination, and now I'm kind of I'm waiting to see what else comes to mind. That was a good blab. That was enjoyable. And like last time, I'll reach the end of this section of levels, and then I'll call it for the day. And again, I can't tell off the top of my head if I missed a level. If I did miss a level, I apologize. But again, I am kind of just trying to maintain a steady conversation while also trying to make sure that I've been to all these levels where they're essentially unmarked because all of them are marked as completed. So if I miss one, I apologize. It's my own fault. Wow. That was extremely close. Aww. There is an achievement for clearing 2 curves in 1 level, but I have no idea how you would even do that besides dumb luck. I've been trying my best whenever it's relevant, but it doesn't look like there's a way to do it consistently, besides just being in the right situation. Part of it is also I'm kind of thinking about Isaac mods again. The worm has re-entered my brain, and now I'm thinking about Isaac mods again. More specifically, I'm thinking about the Bejeweled mod, which I am still extremely proud of. I think, I think it turned out amazingly. What I've wanted to do for a long time is I wanted to make a general extension of that mod that allows people, and mainly myself, is just so that I can have all the functions and callbacks in one place. I want to make more of those. Now, naturally, they're gonna take a while to make, and that's assuming that I even follow through and do them. Nah. God, this level is a pain in the ass to get an ace score on. I remember I spent like probably a solid half an hour on this one level when I was doing it initially. Kahunga. I'm looking over at the thermos of green tea on my side. It is past 9:30, so I probably should not have had a whole thing of green tea, but you know what? I'm gonna drink the rest of it anyway. I don't care. I got nothing tomorrow. I have the stream at like, what, 2 p.m., 3 p.m.? So what if I stay up late? I can return to my usual hobbies of playing video games and watching Snapcube videos because I think they're funny. Oh, that probably could have been a new record. Oh, never mind. That already was a new record. Shut my mouth. Okay, thank God. I just had a moment of pure fear, and I went to go check to see if the mic was on. I would have died inside if I had forgotten to turn the mic on, because I had it off for all the rhythm heaven stuff, of course. There's a curve clear. Now, can we get 2? I don't think so off of this. No! No! Well, so much for that idea. Oh, wow. I realize this game is a very different kind of issue as Peggle, because the issue with Peggle is that, like, there's only so much planning that you can do with random nonsense constantly flying in your face. Like, you can do cool slick tricks and cool skill shots, but at the end of the day, it is a lot of it is just hoping that chaos theory works in your favor. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it. But with this game, I noticed that there's kind of a different problem. Also, I am smashing these levels. Getting way higher scores than I was before. Oh, that is 330,000 points. Oh my god. That's a new point record for me. Bonus ball points, 326,000. Holy smokes. Alright, that's all I got. Next up, we do... Wait a tick. Oh, these are Iron Gauntlet. These are Iron Frog levels. Okay, that's why I didn't recognize them. By the way, I tried doing Iron Frog and I made it up to level 6. There are 10 levels, which is kind of ridiculous. So I guess next time we start on the next set, which is water levels, volcano levels, and then I guess I try Iron Frog to see where that goes. I might be able to do it, who knows. Iron Frog is freaking hard. But that's all I got for now. Thanks so much for watching.